This is Contrazoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault. Today, we are bringing you a bonus episode outside of our usual release format. From September 29th to October 15th, the 61st edition of the New York Film Festival ran. If you regularly check contrazoompod.com, which you absolutely should have bookmarked, Paulo Bautista, host of the Oscars Death Race podcast, has been our man on the ground there. He wrote reviews for several movies that you can see on our site, and if you missed them, he recaps them today with his instant reactions that he recorded after seeing the films. Once again, thank you to Paulo and enjoy this bonus episode. We'll be back next week with our regular full-length shows.
Hey Dakota, hey contrazoompod listeners, this is Paulo from the Oscars Death Race podcast. It's about 2:18 p.m. On Saturday, October 7th. I'm in a Chipotle, a couple blocks away from the Lincoln Center. This is going to be my first screening for the New York Film Festival 2023, the 61st edition. My first time actually being at the festival. So my schedule for the upcoming days is today at 2:45. I'm going to be watching Evil Does Not Exist by Ryusuke Hamaguchi. Around noon on Monday the 9th, I'm going to go ahead and watch Zone of Interest, Jonathan Glazer's film that I think is going to get Best Picture in his UK submission for International Feature. On Wednesday, I'm going to skip Tuesday, but on Wednesday, a little bit after 1:30 or so, I'm going to go see The Taste of Things, which is France's submission to the International Feature category ahead of Justine Triet's Anatomy of a Fall. So, definitely excited to see if this is worth, kind of the controversy around that. And then Thursday, to wrap up my film festival, will be The Boy and the Heron, Hayao Miyazaki's newest film. Definitely looking forward to that one to cap it off. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of a live reaction. So if there's sound in the background, apologies for that. But after each movie, I'm going to go ahead and give my just honest gut reaction reviews. Maybe on the ride home, maybe sitting somewhere after the movie. Before heading out, just to give you the on-the-ground feel of what it's like having seen the film. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and finish this burrito I just got so that I can make it to the theater in time. But yeah, looking forward to chatting with you guys. If you hear that in the background, I'm on the bus. It's about 5:09 p.m. right after I saw Evil Does Not Exist by Ryusuke Hamaguchi at the New York Film Festival. Just getting my quick thoughts out there. First off, I was in the Alice Tully Theater up on the balcony. Ryusuke Hamaguchi came out, introduced the film, said it was actually a project based on a request from the composer for Drive My Car, his most recent film, Eiko Iisubashi, to make visuals for some, music she's working on. So then we hop into the film. Without getting too much into spoilers, it's not as long as Drive My Car, which is like nearly 3-hour movie, but this one's just under 2 hours or so, and it's very meditative is the word, right? The opening shot is that of it's a very slow, fluid tracking shot, looking up at some trees in rural Japan in the winter. No leaves. Music kind of hypnotic, frankly, right? Like he described in the conversation with afterwards that it's 3-act structure. The first act, right, is about nature, and then this father-daughter relationship of the main character Takumi and his daughter Hannah. I feel like for the first 5 to 10 minutes there's like zero dialogue throughout, but it's just him. You see him cutting wood, you see him collecting spring water, and it's just very slow and steady and almost Kogonada-esque, right? I feel like I use that term a lot, but it just is a way to describe just how slow and paced and deliberate it all feels. The second act, so without getting again too much into spoilers, kind of like the main conflict in the film is more or less a zoning development conflict, a movie about zoning development. But basically, this company in Tokyo wants to open a glamping site near this community of about 6,000 people, and it's essentially this this organization, this company comes in, they don't really understand the community and the impact that their glamping site would have on the community, say with the septic tanks or with potential campfires and so on. Apparently, this was actually based on a true story near the studio of Eiko Ishibashi. Where he went to get inspiration, there was a story about a similar company that came and did do a similar presentation to the community, and that got brutally panned for just being completely inadequate. And then, it kind of shifts right a little bit to the perspective of the Tokyo folks as they, I feel kind of sorry for them. They're kind of caught between their big boss, who doesn't really understand the situation, and he says, "Oh, so I guess the community session was a success." No, it wasn't, but everyone just laughed at that, and they're kind of caught between the demands of their boss and their people, and then just clearly understanding that this work will not be good for the community, right? And then I will say that the final scene, it ended very abruptly, and I'm still kind of processing exactly what happened in the ending. It's a bit of a shocker, kind of changes the tone of the film, and I think ties back to the central the title of the film, "Evil Does Not Exist," which you don't really get throughout the film why that is, but I think it comes down to what it is, which I'm not going to give the spoiler here. I think I'll write it up more a little bit later for the code on contrazoompod. But yeah, definitely a great film. I was kind of like in my head judging, like, okay, give him the benefit of the doubt, sort of at a 4 out of 5. Looks like it kind of works there, but then kind of toward the end, and as these characters get fleshed out more, it becomes apparent that this is definitely a 5 out of 5 film for me. Definitely looking forward for other people to watch it. Actually, what I'm interested in is, so we've heard about Ryusuke Hamaguchi having a second film coming out this year called Gift. So that's actually the silent version of this film that will be debuting alongside Eiko Ishibashi, who is performing this. I believe it's debuting at this film festival in Belgium. He said in the discussion, and so he'll be doing a live accompaniment to this film. I think it's black and white. I have to double check that, but so it's essentially right. Like, it's a separate film, but it's one without where the music should become more central. Which interestingly here there wasn't a heavy use of score, and I think one of the interesting things here was like the editing of how it would suddenly cut off the music, or it would transition scenes very abruptly, right? And I that was very effective. And I think the biggest strength of this film is how it controls the pace, and you can get a sense of like the first act, the pace is very slow and deliberate, and then the pace gets a lot faster in the second act, and then it kind of looks a weird hybrid toward the end. But yeah. Overall, definitely enjoyed the film. I also want to say, shout out to Chris from the Academy of Death Racers Discord. During the Q&A, I put up a picture of Yosuke Hamaguchi in the Discord, and Chris, messaged, "Oh, hey, I'm here also." So we ended up meeting up afterwards, and then we're gonna go actually see. I was able to get in the queue ahead of him for tickets, so I was able to get an extra ticket for The Boy and the Heron on Thursday. So Chris will be joining me for that as well. So looking forward to seeing him then, and looking forward to seeing my next film on Monday. But yeah, so far a good start to the New York Film Festival, my first New York Film Festival, and looking forward to covering the rest of it for you guys. It is Monday, October 9th, 2:58 p.m. I'm actually not recording this right at the Lincoln Center where the New York Film Festival takes place. So basically my day was that I was planning on going to go see the 12 p.m. screening of The Zone of Interest, the UK submission for international feature, and also a potential Best Picture contender as well. Bailey was able to make it in before the movie actually started, which was great to actually happen. And then we just kind of hopped straight into Zone of Interest. After the film, there was a Q&A with director, screenwriter Jonathan Glazer, the two leads who played Wendy, Hedwig, and Rudolph Haas, notably Sandra Huller playing the wife, and then also one of the producers as well as the sound director as well, coordinator was in attendance for the Q&A. So obviously the premise of Zone of Interest is that it essentially follows the life of Rudolph Haas and his family. Haas being infamous for being one of the Nazi party members who essentially orchestrated and constructed Auschwitz, the concentration camp. And notably here, he essentially built his house with his family pretty much right next to the concentration camp. And it's kind of an adaptation of a novel of a similar name, which during the Q&A, Glazer definitely acknowledged that it kind of helped plant the seed for the film that he was making, but it mostly served as a way for him to find other primary sources that would have been used for that novel, being used for his own research as well. And obviously Holocaust films have been done to death. But there have even been some, I believe, from the Nazi perspective, right? So what really can be done more that hasn't really been done, and one of the things that this film really, I think, tries to portray is the banality of those who do evil, right? There's always a risk when you do a film and your central characters are pretty much some of the most evil people known to history. Do you accidentally end up glamorizing them? Do you actually end up causing empathy, right? It'd be really easy to fall into the trap of portraying somebody with a perspective that causes you to have, they're just normal humans after all, right? And to some degree, if you weren't really paying attention, you might think that here, right? Like, it shows Rudolf Haas and his family, having a garden, raising their kids, going on, doing all the things a normal family does, right? And that's the film, as they described it in the Q&A, that's the film you see, right? But kind of like, obviously, the context of it is you're kind of realizing, like, okay, like, on one hand, it's a humanizing where it shows that they have a human side to them, but then on the flip side, it causes that to then be inhuman, because the reason they had the sound director on stage was the fact that as they described in the Q&A, there's the film you see and then the film you hear, right? In my mind, this isn't really being talked about right now for the Oscar race for best sound direction. It really, I think, should be in consideration, because even as I'd go as far to say as compared to the Sound of Metal several years ago, which obviously won best sound because it ended up it used the sound or lack thereof to really tell the story of a deaf individual. Here, this film used the sound as a soundscape, right? To they were very conscious throughout the Q&A to talk about the ethics of portraying a horror such as the Holocaust in film, right? And Glazer didn't feel like as if he were really qualified to do that, and so they didn't show the atrocity directly on screen per se, but it was definitely present and not forgotten, right? By the fact that there were the sounds throughout of you could hear the concentration camps just over the wall. So the fact that soundscape was there was definitely, I think, a very crucial and integral part of the film to really making this film have the impact that it does. I mean, the other part I would think out of the film is the fact that there was, the house itself, right? So one of the central parts is how this family has this house next to the concentration camp, and it actually turns out, in the Q&A from the producer that they actually did the research and go all there, and they ended up filming it pretty much on location. They actually built the house from scratch, and the house itself was a character, I think, throughout the film. And apparently one of the more interesting bits from the Q&A was that the production design team, they grew that garden that the family had pretty much from scratch, right? They had a garden grown over the course of 4 months with all the flowers and everything, which was I think, again, as with the sound design, I think a really crucial part of making this film work. I think the directing, putting all that together is top notch. There were a couple of scenes that, at first glance, I didn't really fully understand, particularly, some scenes where it almost looks like they're doing heat vision, or it's like reverse black and white. In the end, I think, from what I've talked to others, it seems that might be, a case of the portraying, some individuals who are contrary to what the Nazis were doing, which, I think makes sense given kind of that. I'm not sure how much that particularly added to the film, or if that was fully necessary, perhaps. But otherwise, I think it was an amazing film. Definitely, I would say probably 4 out of 5 stars. I think the somewhat lack of a true narrative per se, maybe holds it back. It's more like a character study, but not even like a full character study. So, and the way it ended, was very haunting to some degree. But I feel that also for us, right, as individuals, not really wanting the closure of kind of knowing what these individuals did, getting their justice, and maybe that's kind of the point of the film, showing that evil the film I watched before this, right, was Evil Does Not Exist. This shows that, hey, evil does exist, and it can exist, like they said in the Q&A, not from people who we don't relate to, but people who we very much could potentially relate to, and that's the scary part of it. So perhaps not the most uplifting conclusion to the film, but I think one that's very important to be said. So, overall, I'd probably give this again maybe 4 stars out of 5. I don't do half stars. If I did, it'd probably be a 4.5 out of 5. But definitely a worthy contender for the Oscars, and looking forward to seeing how it does over the course of the award season. Okay, so I went to watch the 1:45 p.m. screening of the Pot au Feu, or the Taste of Things, as it's known in English, the French submission for the Oscars International category this year, and the winner of Best Director at the Cannes Film Festival earlier this year. And I'm just going to say, if you don't, a pot au feu is literally translates to pot over fire, which is basically the term of a dish of essentially boiled beef and vegetables. That's kind of emblematic of the French people, right? It's a peasant food. It can also, to some degree, be elevated as well. So it's symbolic of France to some degree. And if that doesn't cue you in that this is a film about food, then yeah, that's what this film is about. And unfortunately for me, when I rushed out, so I've been doing intermittent fasting, so I could only barely get, my wife, we had a couple of leftover hot dogs. I was able to heat those up and put those down before I had to run out to the door to get to my screening. And so I haven't really had a chance to eat since then. And oh boy, that was a mistake, not coming fully prepared with a full stomach, especially since the people around me were eating popcorn. So I definitely smelt that throughout the screening as well. Yeah, I mean, Pot au Feu is, again, a story about set in 1885. It's about, this fine, fancy French gourmet who, has a relationship with his, a relationship of sorts, right? It's not really ambiguous. It's pretty clear that they're into each other. And that they have definitely strong feelings for each other. But the core of their relationship really is that of master and cook, as they say so themselves, though that might be hiding some deeper layers to their relationship. But it's this gourmand and his cook of 20 years, and it's basically, right, most of the film is, frankly, not a lot happens plot narratively wise, right? There's no real external pressure, there's no real real internal pressure or conflict as well. It's, again, very similar to a slice of life. Like frankly, it seems like a lot of the films I've been watching this film festival kind of could, in some sense, fall into the slice of life category. Here, the focus is very much on the cooking and the cooking techniques. The very first, maybe 30 minutes is basically just scenes of the cook putting together a elaborate meal for him and his friends. With great renown. He's obviously very well known by his friends. And I mean, if there's one reason to watch this, it is for the cinematics of the cooking sequences. The loving, you can tell like the loving care that was put into capturing, the effort and so on that was put in that goes into each dish. Especially when you consider, right, they don't have the conveniences of modern technology, no electric ovens, no easy running water. They need to get the water from the well. You can definitely get the sense, and even then, they don't have thermometers, right? They don't have electric ovens where you can adjust the level of gas or heat being used. They have to use coal, right, to fire their ovens and so on. And yet they're still able to create such elaborate dishes. It's kind of astounding, right? And this is really a love letter to food. But more than that, it's a love letter to food and what it means. Food as a form of love, right? As a form of affection, as a form of pride, right? So as an art form, right? And if that's not quintessentially French, I don't really know what is. This definitely made me hungry. So I think overall I would give this one probably like a 4 out of 5, right? I don't think there was really enough meat, ironically enough, to the plot of this. A little bit of a slow pace and a little bit stretched out of a meal, so to speak. But still, where it shines brilliantly. And if you are someone who loves cooking, right? If you're someone who likes not even fancy food, but just like a well home cooked meal, I think this would be a film you would appreciate, if only for the food porn, if only, right, to watch those sequences of the cooking, right? I think that definitely comes in as something to really appreciate. So overall, 4 out of 5, maybe 5 out of 5 if you're a foodie. Just got out of watching The Boy and the Heron, Hayao Miyazaki's latest film. I'm actually joined by another fellow Death Racer from the AODR Discord. It's Chris.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Yeah, we just came out of the Boy and the Heron screening. I thought it was absolutely great. What did you think?
Yeah, so for me, thinking about how I think this felt to some degree like a remix of a lot of his other stuff, right? Like there were elements of Spirited Away, right? Kind of like an Alan Locke, like the suit sprites, for example. There's definitely like a reference to like The Wind Rises and like the plane stuff, moving out to the countryside, right? Similar to Totoro, for example, and then just kind of like this maximalist nature of like this fantasy world going on with a house moving castle. That's kind of like my very first gut instinct, where people said that it's kind of, I've seen like other reviews say it feels a little bit like a remix, and I definitely got elements where he's definitely pulling from, obviously like Miyazaki is very much like he pulls all of his different elements in, and this is something along those lines.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's definitely things from all of his movies into this one, which honestly, I love a lot of his movies, possibly all of them, so like that's not really a bad thing. Animation was absolutely gorgeous. So many just utterly breathtaking shots. I feel like this might be his most... There's a lot of like really interesting imagery like throughout. Kind of surrealist a little bit at a point where like he's like fading into stuff. I'm going to keep it super vague. There's a lot going on at all times. Sometimes it does become a bit too much. I think a rewatch would help with that. But yeah, another strong film from Miyazaki.
Yeah, I think if there's like, I would call it a criticism per se, but one note is that, Spirited Away, for example, is a fairly straightforward plot. Even if a film like, say, Totoro or Kiki's Delivery Service does still have a plot, it still has very much vibes. This one, I think, started off with a bit of a plot, right? I would say it's not too much of a spoiler. Like, it's kind of the premise that, the main character, Maruto, his mother dies in the hospital fire in the very first scene, which, speaking of animation, like the scenes of him running toward the hospital in the fire, in the first, minute of the film, it's just like, okay, animation-wise, hot take, this is up there with Across the Spider-Verse this year in terms of, animation quality. Might be a bit of a hot take, but that's just me. But then, yeah, it's a little bit, starts off about grief, right? His father, again, kind of somewhat of the setting the premise, they move out to the countryside. He, starts a relationship with his former sister-in-law, I guess, which I don't know if that's like a cultural thing, maybe of the time, perhaps. But in any case, he doesn't really accept her as his mother, right? And that's kind of like going into this fantasy world eventually. That is, I think, the premise of grief. It kind of loses that thread a little bit on into the film, but it does kind of tie it up to some degree toward the end. So it doesn't quite have as tight a narrative grasp to it, but definitely, I think vibes are definitely there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the vibes. I don't know if I would say it's a competition between Across the Spider-Verse in terms of animation quality, but it's definitely a beautiful, beautiful film. Sometimes it is, yes, too sprawling for its own good. Could have been a little tighter, could have been a little more focused, but like everything else, Miyazaki, he knows what he's doing at this point in his career, and he crafts yet another great film.
Yeah, I mean, ironically enough, I don't know if this is just me thinking a little bit too hard about it, a little bit of his son's Tales of Earthsea, right? Where it may be that one was, I think one of its flaws was it tried to do too much of the world building here. This one similarly tried to build a little bit too much of the world without really, I think, nailing that to some degree, but not to his fault. I think it's definitely a lot of ideas. I will say, to its credit, we've heard that this is supposed to be Miyazaki's last film, which has already been debunked. He says he's coming back for another one, but originally the concept was he wanted to leave something behind for his kid, which, with the idea of his mom passing and him or rather his grandson, and then the main character Maruto having grief, I kind of get that sense of wanting to leave something and wanting, one of the themes kind of in the end is living in an imperfect world and trying to move forward with that. Obviously Miyazaki's a pacifist famously, right? Kind of thinking about all of the horrors of war and so on. This kind of ties into that. So I think there's definitely, a bit of a stronger thematic element throughout than maybe some of his other films.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's a lot to grab onto thematically, with the themes of him trying to accept his new mother, and then his relationship with the Heron, of course. And there's always so much going on that'll keep your mind occupied.
Yeah. Anything else that's kind of gut feeling, gut check about this film for you, Chris?
Yeah, I think we hit on all of it. Great animation, It's very sprawling, a lot to think about thematically, sometimes a little bit for its own good, a little too much, but just great stuff all around.
I mean, I'd rather have a more ambitious film that maybe doesn't quite hit the mark of ambitious film versus one that plays it safe and doesn't strive for those heights, which I think is, in animation, right, the fact that that's all hand-drawn, or mostly hand-drawn, if anything, is insane, right? So, I mean, it's not the best Miyazaki work of all time. He's not always going to top himself, right? I would firmly put it in the upper third of his films for me personally. I like it when he leans a little bit more into the maximalist, surreal, supernatural nature of things. So that's just me personally. It's people have said, oh, it's a mixed bag. A mixed Miyazaki film is still miles ahead of almost any other animation out there today.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say probably for me, it's probably in the middle, I would say, within his filmography, but again, in the middle of Miyazaki's filmography, it's still better than a lot of animated movies out there.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously it's not officially a competition, but in the Oscar race, it is to some degree a competition. That's been myself, Paulo, and Chris from the Oscars Death Race Discord, giving our impressions review for Boy and the Heron here at the 61st New York Film Festival. We're going to go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and record something a little bit later for kind of like a wrap-up for this audio diary, but thanks for listening, everyone. So, after the New York Film Festival, there's still a couple of days more to go in the fest, but unfortunately I'll be out of town. So, I just finished up writing my last couple of reviews for Dakota to put on the contrazoompod website. Many thanks to him for putting all of my reviews for the film fest up on his site. You can definitely go check them out there. Just wanted to give an overall recap of New York Film Festival. And, it's kind of interesting thinking about it, how a lot of my films kind of related to each other some way, in a sense, right? Like, so, for example, Evil Does Not Exist, The Zone of Everything, and to some degree, The Taste of Things, actually, all three of them kind of related in the sense that they were more or less slice-of-life films, right? And of course, there's the connection between Taste of Things and Evil Does Not Exist, kind of talking about the art that goes into the craft work of something, right? Specifically, either just rural work in general, but specifically, right, like getting water to make soba noodles better in the countryside, and then kind of the craft of putting together the food there for putting together the food in Taste of Things. So, really interesting to see, I think, in a film festival, to see all of these things together. I mean, it's definitely a great experience if you haven't been to your local film festival. Of course, I'm a little bit, lucky I get to be in New York and kind of like one of the epicenters of film in the world. But, if you've been to your local film festival, or just any place where there are fellow film lovers out there, I would definitely encourage you to go check it out. Watching a film like that is a communal experience. There were parts of the film which, if I had been watching it by myself at home, where, supposedly you're more free to react as you like at a film, I wouldn't have felt as moved to react in a certain way to a scene watching it either on my phone, right, or even on my larger TV in my living room. Hopefully this isn't the last time I get to cover the New York Film Festival for contrazoompod. But thanks again to Dakota for having me do this audio diary for you guys. Thank you guys for listening. Check out my reviews over on the contrazoompod website, and if you want to listen to me talk some more, aside from, I'm sure I'll be on more episodes of Dakota's podcast in the future, but I'm at the Oscars Death Race podcast for sure. And if I ever decide to start it up again, hopefully soon, the Box Office Watch podcast and the Yet Another Anime podcast, all found on Spotify. I'm sure Dakota will link to those in the show notes. But thanks again, and happy film watching, everyone.
Thank you, Paulo, for the instant recaps. As mentioned before, check out the show notes or go to contrazoompod.com to see his full reviews. You can find links to Paulo's podcast in the show notes. Make sure you check out our website often, as we have plenty more film reviews coming, as we are covering the Imaginative Film Festival that celebrates the best in Indigenous cinema. This has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. Follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads at contrazoompod. Did you see any films at this year's New York Film Festival? Send an email to contrazoompod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music, and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.